right. So hello, everyone. Sorry for the brief delay while we got this all figured out. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome to the session today. And what we're going to be talking about are the 8 tech questions to ask before you even think about a new website. Before I jump into that, I just want to make sure that you all know, for those of you who are here on the Zoom room, there is there's a chat feature, and you all are welcome to post questions during my presentation. And then hopefully we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end in order to go through those questions. So you're welcome to do that. And I'm going to share my video as well so you can see my face. Okay. So thank you all again for being here. So on a lot of web projects that we start off working on, I'm going to get to some more introductions in a minute, but we work on a lot of projects with clients, and all they really know is that they want a new website. And so they come in with this attitude, just give me a new website. They know that their current one is hard to manage, or they know that their design may be really outdated, or that it's not serving an important organizational need, or that the organization has made the decision to jump over to Drupal and they just need to rebuild their site. However, before we can jump into building a new website, there are a lot of important things we need to consider in order to make sure that we're set up to deliver a website that actually meets the goals and needs of the organization that we're going to be working with. So let's start off by imagining that you have a rich relative appear in your life, and she offers you $1 million to make her the perfect sandwich. Fantastic, you think. Okay, so you immediately go to work. But you go to the store and then you start thinking about all of your options. You don't know anything about this relative. Does your sandwich eater like meat, or is she a vegetarian? Should I create something really simple like this sandwich? Or maybe I should go all out and make something crazy like this sandwich. Does she like spicy mustard, plain mustard, no mustard? Should you cut the sandwich vertically or diagonally? So you do your best job, but when your eccentric relative arrives to try your sandwich, you've simply made your best guess. You may have missed the mark completely. I mean, who knows? In a lot of ways, a new website is similar. It can be designed and built in a million different ways. There are countless choices that you're going to have to make throughout that process, both big and small, that will influence the long-term success of your new site. So for example, let's say you need a simple form that will allow people to submit a change of address. Seems pretty simple. However, just this one example, there's a ton of questions you need to answer first. Where should the form exist? Is it a single experience, or is it a multi-step process? Are people going to need to register on your website to submit the form? If they do need to register, what system is handling those registrations, and how is that system integrated with this form? What happens when the form is submitted? Is it going to go to a single person, or does it need to be routed to different places in your organization based on some choice in the form? Are the responses going to be stored in a database? Is it integrated within Drupal itself? Is the submitted info securely handled? Does your form integrate automatically, maybe with a CRM or some other third-party system that you have in place? What kind of autoresponder email is sent to the person who submitted the form? And what system is responsible for sending that email? And that's just a small sampling of questions that we would want to start answering before we just jump in and start building this form. One simple goal has countless solutions and dynamics, just like building a sandwich. So over the years, we've begun to refine the technical questions that we ask at the beginning of every project. All right, so my name is Stephen Tidmore, and I'm the VP of Technology at Mighty Citizen. Mighty Citizen transforms mission-driven organizations through branding, marketing, and digital communications. We typically help governments, nonprofits, associations, and universities increase their impact and revenue by creating deeper connections with their audiences. Our client list has included the Texas Education Agency, Texas Health and Human Services, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, AARP, etc. We are based here in Austin, Texas, and I'm really excited to be here talking to you today. So I've been involved with a lot of web projects over the years, a whole lot. And one of the benefits of being involved in so many web projects is that I've also seen a number of ways that those projects can go wrong. I've become much better about knowing what questions we need to ask upfront in order to avoid some of the pitfalls that I've seen projects fall into. So today we're going to be exploring a lot of those tech questions that we talk about at the beginning of a new project. We'll discuss some processes like content migration, maybe just some content requirements in the CMS, single sign-on, and a lot of other things in between. And hopefully you'll begin understanding what questions we ask before we get too far along in the website redesign or rebuilding process. And these are some questions that you can ask maybe when maybe a communications team or public affairs team come to you with a new web project. And the goal of asking all these questions is just to start building out a well-informed list of all the technical specifications or the technical requirements that you're going to have for your website. So my goal for the presentation today is just to explore some of the common tech issues we see when we begin a new web project, like I just said. We'll start to think through some of the questions that will help make the website process more efficient. We're going to cover a number of questions that we ask internal IT teams in order to help understand some of the technical requirements for a new project. You'll learn how to evaluate the tools you need to work with and what tools you'll need to meet your organizational needs. And ultimately, you'll be able to start creating a list of requirements for your new website. Now, just a couple of points first. First off, I'm assuming that you have some basic knowledge about, websites and Drupal in general, and some of the technical aspects we're going to be talking about. This is listed as a beginner track, so it's not going to get too deep into any deep technical requirements, but you do need to have a basic understanding. And also, there are a large number of other questions we ask at the beginning of a project through our discovery sessions that are way more focused on information architecture, design, content strategy, marketing, analytics, all that type of thing. But the ones that we're discussing here today are related mostly just to the technology that we are going to want to start understanding for the web project. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a big one, content migration. So content migration is often one of those things that people just assume is going to happen seamlessly when they're building a new website that's going to take the place of an existing website. However, in all my years, and maybe in a lot of the web projects you all have worked on, it's rarely seamless. And sometimes, honestly, migrating content might be hurting you more than it is helping you. There's a common misconception I see that everything on your existing website is going to have a home within the new website, and that's not necessarily the case. Some of your new content some of your old content may not be relevant in your restructured website at all. It also might not align with the newly architected and designed pages. You can't count on everything having a one-to-one fit. It's kind of a square peg, round hole, or no hole situation. So the main consideration here is that you don't want to limit yourself in the architecture and design of the new site by forcing the old content to match up with what you have on the current site. It's most likely not going to match up one-to-one. Let's take an example. So what if your current website is pretty old and it just has one large WYSIWYG field for every page? There's no structured fields. There's nothing else there. But on your new website, there may be a lot of structured data. So maybe the team member pages used to just be a WYSIWYG field, but now you have custom fields for their team member name, their job title, their phone number, their email address, the department they work under, any other number of fields with specific information. So if all that content was just contained in a single WYSIWYG field on your old site, you need to figure out what process you're going to need to go through to get that data into the structured fields. And honestly, is it even worth it to figure that out and build it into the migration script? Sometimes there may only be 20 pages. You may only have 20 team members, and manually copying that content into the new site would actually take much less time. Or is it even possible to write logic around getting the data into the new fields? It might actually not be possible because maybe on your old site, there was no logical structure. People just put stuff wherever they wanted in a big WYSIWYG field. Now, however, there are times it does make sense for sure to migrate your existing content. We see this a lot with structured content like press releases, blog articles, events, content like that already has some structure in your CMS, whether it's Drupal or something else. However, there are often new pieces of content that need to be added after the import based on the requirements of the new website. So that brings us to new data. Will the migrated content need to have new pieces of data added after migration? So for example, maybe you have a new event calendar and you had an old event calendar. And so you migrate all that content, but then you realize, okay, on your new event calendar, there's filtering based on categories, and those categories didn't exist on the previous website. Someone has to go through and assign those categories to each event, since the content didn't exist before. And that has to happen either before the migration in the old site or in a spreadsheet of some sort that you're going to migrate in, or after the migration. So if you do need to add new pieces of content, you need to figure out who's going to handle that process. Do you have someone available to spend the time adding in those new pieces of content once the original content has been migrated? And if so, you need to make sure you're working that into the timeline for your website project. Also, after you run the migration, you need to think about the possibility of having broken data or styles with old CSS. The URL structure is most likely going to change. So that means that if you import content with hard-coded links in the HTML, all of those links will be broken. So either you need to fix each broken link, or you need to redirect all the old links to the new ones. Ideally, you'll do both. Hopefully you'll have enough structure with the URL patterns from the old site that adding in redirects based on those patterns won't be a huge issue. You know, you can hopefully write some logical rules around that, but I have worked with old sites where there is no logical structure to the old URLs. So you have to map redirects one-to-one or go through and fix every single URL in the migrated content. Do you need to deal with images or files as part of the migration? If so, then you need to make sure that that media is handled properly. During the migrations, the new media fields are updated correctly to point to the new locations, because the files are most likely going to live in a different folder structure on the new website. If that doesn't happen as part of the migration process, then you have to go through and take care of each field and file. Does the existing content you're going to migrate have a bunch of inline CSS? I have seen this happen on some really old sites where content admins had free reign and WYSIWYG fields, and then the content ends up being migrated with all the inline styles, and it doesn't match the look and feel of the new site because it's overriding all the styles that have been built into the site. So, you know, we've had to go through and strip out all the inline CSS as part of the migration process. Also, does someone truly understand the structure and the meaning of the source data that needs to be migrated? In other words, does someone on your team fully grasp how and why the current data was set up in the way that it was and the needs that it met? There's a high probability that the people involved in the content migration itself might not have a thorough grasp of the structure and meaning of that source data. You know, maybe they weren't around, or maybe it's something where, you know, the original structure was kind of developed piecemeal over time and no one has a full grasp of that. The problem with this is that it can lead to the loss of information during the migration, or it can come with a very high cost in time or money for people to get up to speed on the historical data structure. I've worked on a lot of web projects like this where it can take a very long time to understand the historical data enough to even make recommendations on what should be migrated or how it should be migrated. If we're working with a client who doesn't really understand this structure, you know, oftentimes they basically have to pay us to figure it out for them, and they may end up spending a lot more money than they might have allocated in their budget because it can take a long time. Okay, question number 2, where will the new site be hosted? So this seems pretty obvious. You obviously need to figure out a web host for your new site. And so the first thing you need to do is figure out the specs from your current website traffic and hosting environment. You'll need to work with whoever has details, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, about your current hosting setup and the visitor analytics to get information about the following points here. First off, visitor analytics. Ideally, this would be coming from Google Analytics or something else that you have on the server. Just, you know, what's your traffic? Hard drive space. How much hard drive space do you currently take up on your web host? How much RAM are you using on a regular basis? How much CPU are you using? And what's the monthly bandwidth that you're averaging? And you want to make sure you take into account not only your regular activities, so the averages, but what are the traffic spikes? So if you have a really big controversial press release you release and there's a huge traffic spike, you need to make sure you're accounting for that as well. Which brings us to scalability, access, and support. So once you have those specs, then you're going to want to figure out what your needs are for scalability, access, and support. You want a hosting solution that provides enough bandwidth for additional traffic, assuming that your new website will ideally attract more people. When are you going to need to scale up your hosting resources and how often? So scalability, as most of you probably know, allows you to increase the specifications and the capabilities and kind of the horsepower behind your web servers to fit your traffic needs. Auto scaling is fantastic, which allows you to adjust these capabilities so you're not overpaying for something that you're not going to use year round. And this is built in with a lot of, Drupal specific web hosts. Auto scaling comes kind of standard. For example, let's say an organization has steady traffic throughout most of the year, but as I just said earlier, maybe they release a really controversial press release twice a year that causes a sudden influx of traffic. You need to make sure that sudden influx of traffic doesn't bring down your website. So auto scaling is a great option because it allows you to scale up when needed instead of paying for a fixed amount to accommodate for that increased traffic throughout the entire year. Second question is about access. Who needs to access the hosting environment? And at what level? Are they going to be able to work with the available access levels that the web host you're looking at is going to offer you? So do the people who need to access the hosting environment need SSH access or SFTP access just to one folder so they can upload some files? Or do they need full SSH access, or do they need root access? Are you going to be allowing connections just from a set of defined IP addresses? What kind of firewalls and restrictions do you want in place? So you want to kind of ask those questions and build a list of those requirements. And then as you're looking at various web hosts, make sure they can meet those requirements. Does your web host that you're looking into support a modern development workflow, ideally a Git-based development workflow? As we have run into on some projects, are you going to have to use a dedicated laptop that's given to you by an IT team? And that dedicated laptop is the only thing that will allow you to use remote desktop to access a server that's in a lockdown data center. And then they expect you to write all of your code through remote desktop. If so, you need to find that out now and hopefully make plans to convince them that a modern Git-based workflow can be secure. Who's supporting the hosting environment versus the website itself? Is there a separation between those two things? Is there a separation between who's going to be supporting the hosting environment versus the actual Drupal site? If you're going to work with a host that also expects you to have system administrators on staff to maintain the servers themselves, you need to know that up front. We do see this, obviously not when you're working with specific Drupal-based web hosts, but oftentimes a lot of our government clients may have internal IT teams and they have an in-house data center, but they may not want to actually manage the server stack that you want. And so you need to make sure there's system administrators on staff that can handle that. Sometimes there's conflicts between an agency such as ourselves and a web host if we don't discuss up front who is responsible for which pieces of the hosting environment and the application itself. Which brings us to supported technologies. What sort of technologies is the host able to support? So again, I've worked on projects where they may be forced to use an internal data center, but the IT team that manages that internal data center is only familiar with .NET systems or .NET environments. So that's not great if you're going to be building a Drupal website and want to put it on a LAMP stack using PHP. So it's great if you can go with a web host that specializes in Drupal or is at least very familiar with Drupal. DNS hosting. Do you know where your DNS zone is located, where it's hosted? This doesn't really come into play until launch time, but we've had a number of clients that aren't sure where their DNS records are hosted or who they need to talk to in order to get those updated. And so this has delayed the launch of some projects because at launch, we need to point the domain name to the new IP address of the new server, but no one knows how to do that. So we're asking about it way up front now at the very beginning of projects. Also, you need to make sure that you know if there's an internal DNS server in your office. I know that most of us aren't in offices right now, but if you were, is there a DNS server internally to your office that needs to be updated as well for launch? We've run into this before where no one in-house knew that this existed. And so we've launched a new website and we update the DNS records to point to the new website, but then everyone internal to the organization who's in the office can't see it because the IT team hasn't updated the internal DNS server. So ask that question up front, make sure that you're accounting for that if that's in place. Third question, how does content get published? Okay, content is king, so it should be a major consideration for your new website. What you want to do first is consider your organizational goals and existing procedures for publishing content. And so what I mean by that is who's working with your content, who's working with your content now, and what kind of permissions will they need? What sort of goals do you have around producing new content? How often do you need to produce it? Who in your organization is allowed to produce it? Is your content up to date and relevant now? And if it's not, you need to ask yourself, why not? Is it because there's some limitation in the content publishing process in your current CMS, or is it really an organizational or content governance issue? Do you really need publishing workflow built into the CMS? So publishing workflow is where one person can either make an edit or publish a new piece of content into Drupal, and then someone else has to approve that before it goes live. That process is often one of those things that seems really desirable in organizations, and it may be, but you want to make sure that you take into account who's going to be approving the content. Because I've worked on projects before where the person who needs to approve the content for publishing is never actually going to log into Drupal to do that. They don't want to do that. They want to just have an email sent to them and reply and say, okay, approve. So don't get stuck with a capability that you're never going to utilize, or that's actually going to cause your content to not be kept up to date. If you do need a publishing workflow capability, you just need to think about how many levels of approval you're going to need. Does a new piece of content need to go to one person to get approved, and then a next person, and then a next person, and then it's finally live? If so, make a list of that and kind of build out that approval workflow. Question number 4, what third-party systems do we need to integrate with? Your website is hardly ever an island, especially with the complex organizations that exist in government agencies. There's always third-party systems that need to be taken into account. At least there have been on every project I've worked on for many, many years. So this is not your website. The first step is literally just to build a list of every third-party system that is going to need to be integrated with your website. And don't worry about the methods or the details of your integration yet. Just make a list of every system. So what I mean by that is just to think about how your organization handles things like lead forms, tracking codes, social feeds, maybe newsletter signups, events, payments, more. Whatever those things are, make a list of those. A lot of organizations find themselves with, maybe a dozen or more third-party applications in their tech stack. So they may have a donor member database, a marketing automation system, a volunteer management system, an employee recruitment system, a learning management system, and all those may be just a small sampling of things in their ecosystem. So once you have that list, you want to think about, is the integration with that third-party system simple or complex? So for example, on the simple side, is it just some embed code or a link off to a third-party site? If so, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes you may think it's, oh, we have to integrate with this third-party system. It's going to be really complicated, but oftentimes it may just be a piece of embed code you put on your site that the third-party system provides, or it may just be a link. The next step up from that, is there a one-way data feed you need to take into account? So does your website need to ingest data from the third party, or does your website need to send data to the third party? Or is it more complex than that? Is there a full API integration that you need to figure out how to work in, where the two systems need to constantly talk back and forth to each other? That obviously requires more work. And ideally, it's with a third-party system where there's already a Drupal module that will help you with that. But if not, there could be a lot of complex custom code you have to write. To help figure out the method of integration, just ask yourself, do you need to share data back and forth? So for example, let's imagine that you have events that live in an event management system, and you're building a new Drupal website. And at first you think all you need to do is link off to that system so people can register for events. However, then you realize, okay, well actually our designs and wireframes have the events being displayed on the homepage in just little snippets. So if the event management system has some embed code you can use and place it on the homepage, great. However, what if that doesn't look cohesive with the rest of your site? Or it doesn't give you enough control? So if that's the case, then you realize you actually need to have the events pulled into Drupal itself, so then your content administrators can choose which events are going to be displayed on the homepage. So often we deal with this a lot, and often what we do is we import the details of the events from that third-party system directly into Drupal, so then we can display them where they're needed across the website. And then we will link from that event, from that website, over to the event system for the actual event registration and payment. Something else to consider is, are your website and the third-party system both going to need to know that you've logged in successfully? If so, then you need to worry about a single sign-on process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The fifth question goes along with third-party systems. So will a third-party website need to be skinned? So third-party websites can often be customized with design elements to make them match your brand. And we call this process skinning typically. So if your visitors log into a third-party system that is linked from your website, you don't want it to look completely disconnected. You want that third-party website to have elements of your brand colors, the font, the imagery, and you want it to tie it together. So, if your website links to a separate payment website and it's just a payment form, you want to skin that so it at least matches the elements of your new brand or your new website. So consider up front which third-party integrations that you're using should be skinned. Just make a list of those. Make a list of every third-party system that has a public-facing website or application that people from your site are going to need to interact with. And then you need to figure out which of those third-party sites can be skinned. So which of those third-party sites give you any capability to modify the look and feel. And then find out the limits for each of those sites. What extent can you skin the third-party site? Can you only change colors, or can you also adapt some fonts and add new imagery? And next, you need to figure out who's going to be responsible for skinning each system. So you have a list now of all the sites that you can scan and that need to be scanned. Who's going to handle that? Is your team going to need to do that, or is this something that the third-party provider handles? And then if it's the third-party provider that's going to be handling it, how long is that going to take? And is this going to delay the main website project? A third-party provider might require a set of front-end files from your web development team in order to create the same look and feel on their system. However, we've run into issues in the past where we may provide those files too early in the process to meet their deadline, but then things change on our side during QA, and that requires a third party to redo some of their work. But the flip side of that is that if we end up providing those files too late in the process, then we might end up needing to wait for the third party to complete their work before we can launch the new website. So there's not a perfect answer here for the timing, but it's just something you need to make sure you're taking into account for the timing of your web project. Sixth question, single sign-on. So do you need single sign-on? So single sign-on is a configuration that allows your users to use one set of credentials to log on to multiple related systems. If your organization has different systems for your main website, an event registration site, an e-commerce system, then you don't want to require your users to log into all three of those using separate credentials, of course. You want to offer them a single sign-on experience. So the first question is, do you really need single sign-on? And the question you can ask yourself to figure that out is, does your new website need to know that visitors to your website have signed in to a different application? Do we need to know that they've authenticated through a different application? And this can also include letting people log in to Drupal itself using accounts external to Drupal, so just into the Drupal admin panel. One reason we build single sign-on often is that a website might have gated content. So that means there may be content that is locked down, so only people who have signed in can access that content. And the user accounts that need to control that are already stored in another system. And if that's the case, then you need to build some sort of single sign-on system. If you do need to build the single sign-on, then the next question you want to ask yourself is, does your website need to know information about the logged in user, like maybe their name or a department they're from or organization, or the level of their account, or does it just need to know that they've logged in and authenticated properly? And this can kind of help determine the complexity of the single sign-on system. If you do need to use a single sign-on system, you'll need to decide which system is going to serve as the identity provider. So if you already have a separate system that holds user accounts, or if you use something like Azure ID or Okta or something similar, then that's going to make the decision for you. You don't want to move all those user accounts into Drupal. If you don't already have one of those systems, is it an option to have Drupal control the memberships? Or do you need to set up a third-party identity system just for this purpose? And if you are going to need to integrate with a third-party identity system, what technologies can you support and what technologies are offered by that identity provider? Ideally, it'll be something standard like SAML or LDAP, but it may require some custom programming. It may just be a REST API that you have to hook into. Drupal has lots of modules that make this relatively straightforward on the Drupal side if the identity provider is using standard technology like SAML and LDAP. Seventh question, how are you going to handle site search? So do people need to search through content on your site? Most likely the answer is yes. And if so, then building the search engine for your site can be a pretty complex endeavor. And you're gonna need to think about some of those requirements before you decide what solution you're gonna use. First thing to ask yourself is, where does the data live that needs to be available inside the search engine? Does your site search need to pull data from multiple systems or multiple websites? Are those systems all web-based, or are some of them internal only databases? Do you need to index the content of a third-party website? If so, that all kind of helps determine the search solution you're going to use. Do you need to have the text of files such as PDF files indexed by your site search engine? Is any of the content that needs to be indexed only available to logged in users? And if so, how sensitive is that data, and how secure is the search solution that you're looking into? Does your data need to be categorized in order to offer filtered searches where people can kind of drill down based on some categories? And if so, how are those categories added to the data in your site search engine? Sometimes, third-party site search engines may require you to add custom meta tags into the templates for every page in order to feed that data into the search engine. Next, think about some of the requirements for how you want to manage that search data. Is there a need on your side to have non-technical users modify the properties of the search engine? And what I mean by that is, do non-technical users need to be able to go in and add some different filtering rules, or maybe they need to customize results for certain keywords? If so, there's some great third-party solutions out there that give non-technical users a lot of control over the search results. But if you want to look into those third-party solutions, do you have any budget for the third-party search solution? Search is hard, and these can offer fantastic search capabilities for a lot cheaper than it would cost to build in-house, but you need to make sure you have the budget. A few that we've used are Acquia Search, Cluedo, Agolia, SwiftType, AdSearch. Those are fantastic, but they do come with a cost, so make sure you're planning for that. If the search engine does need to scan your public website and you're launching a new website, you need to make sure you're taking that into account for your timeline. Ideally, you'll have a way to feed the data into your search engine prior to your site launch date, so you don't have to wait for it to index the site. But if not, if it has to scan the public site, then you can't do that until the site is live. Last question, question number 8. What standards are you required to follow? Either legal standards or just best practice standards. Just build a list of these. So some you want to consider browser compatibility. Look at your historical analytics data to help make this decision. Hopefully you don't have to support IE11 anymore, but there's a good chance that you might, especially with a lot of government websites. Are there any specific security requirements or policies in place in your organization? Most likely the answer is yes, but sometimes it may just be something similar to, you need to adhere to OWASP best practices, but there may be a really robust set of security standards that you need to be aware of. You may need to make sure you're planning for time for a security and penetration test. So figure out who's responsible for those security standards in your organization and get a list of them. Are there privacy laws you need to follow? Is your data gonna need to fall under HIPAA or GDPR or the CCPA? CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Are there written or unwritten performance requirements or expectations? I've worked on sites before where someone of influence in the organization believes that the new site's going to be a complete failure if every page doesn't load in less than 1 second. And we need to know that up front so we can set some proper expectations. And of course, another requirement, are you already thinking about accessibility? If not, you need to be thinking about it now. There's 60 million Americans that have some form of disability, and you have to take them into account. And this needs to be thought of from the very beginning instead of waiting until the end to remediate everything that wasn't done with accessibility in mind from the beginning. It can be really hard to fix things that were designed to be inaccessible once you reach development. What level of accessibility do you need to target? If it's a government website, WCAG AA is the minimum, because Section 508 for sure for federal projects now points to WCAG AA. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a standard from the W3C that your site needs to be compatible with. And make sure you're building out a testing plan. How are you going to test to make sure you're meeting the accessibility standards? In order to be WCAG AA compatible, you really have to do manual testing in addition to automated testing. So make sure you're planning for actual manual screen reader and keyboard testing. Okay, so summing it all up, building a new website can be done in a million different ways. And there are a lot of questions you should ask up front that will help make the entire website process more efficient. And the goal of all these questions we've talked about today is just to be able to create a list of the technical requirements that can help guide you throughout the entire website project. Okay, I'm going to try to take some questions, but just first I wanted to make sure I posted this link on the Drupal GovCon site, but there's a link here, mightycitizen.com/8questions that has the slides you can download. And there's also a takeaway we created called the Website Technology Planner for Government that just has a big list of all these questions that I've talked about during the presentation that you can download and print out and use to kind of start getting yourself going with building out a list of requirements. And with that, I am going to take some questions. And if you have a question, feel free to just type it into the chat box. And if not, then we can end early. Okay, great. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. I'll be hanging out here for a few more minutes. If anyone does have any questions they want to ask in this room, feel free to just chat away. And I really appreciate your time, and thanks for listening to me. Great, thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks for the comments in chat. Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. I know it's a lot of information that I kind of threw at you. I was just trying to get through a lot of the questions, but hopefully that download you can kind of take and digest each of those. And again, the point of these questions is just to start building out a list of requirements that you can use for your new web project. Yeah, someone just posted in the chat about how this may be good to present to leadership as an outline to help them understand the undertaking. Yeah, that's a great idea. You know, there's tons of these questions that people don't think about. And it does help just to say, here's just a small sampling of things we have to figure out before we jump into this project. So yeah, it would be great to use as an outline. Also, this is the just on my thank you slide. If you guys need it, there's my email address and our website. If you have any questions, you're welcome to follow up with me. And then I'll go ahead and pass it back to the Drupal GovCon organizer. If there's anything else I need to do on my side.
Nope, absolutely nothing. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing, but I'll be in this room. I think we have like 4 minutes left in this session, so I'll be here if anyone has any questions.